Imagine waking up every day with no freedom, no chance to choose your future, and the constant weight of survival on your shoulders. Now, picture living this way for your entire life, with no escape in sight. This was the reality for millions of people in medieval Europe, living as serfs. The harsh life of a serf was a world most of us can hardly imagine, but it was their world. They were born into it, and for many, they never left it. In this video, we're going to explore the grim existence of serfs in medieval Europe. You'll learn what their daily life looked like, how they were treated, and why they had almost no say in their own fate. You may think that these were people living hundreds of years ago, but their struggles shaped the society that we live in today. Stay with me till the end because this story is not just about hardship. It's about survival, power, and a system that shaped the world we know today. What can we learn from their suffering? Let's dive in and find out. In medieval Europe, the majority of people lived as peasants, and a large portion of them were serfs. But what exactly is a serf? A serf was a peasant who was legally bound to the land they worked on. Unlike slaves who could be bought and sold, serfs were not considered personal property. Instead, they were tied to a specific piece of land owned by a lord or noble. If the land was sold or transferred, the serfs remained with it. Essentially, their lives were controlled by the land and the lord who owned it. In the feudal system, serfs were at the bottom of the social ladder. The system itself was a rigid structure with a king at the top, followed by nobles, knights, and clergy. The serfs occupied the lowest rung. They were the backbone of medieval society, providing the labor needed to sustain everyone else. They worked the fields, raised animals, and produced the food that fed the entire kingdom. But despite their importance, they had no real control over their own lives. Life as a serf was harsh and unforgiving. Imagine working from dawn to dusk with very little rest, and often with little reward. The serf's job was simple in theory: work the land to produce food. But the reality was far from simple. The land they worked on was often poor and difficult to cultivate. They didn't have modern farming tools. Instead, they had basic tools like wooden plows and sickles. These tools were often outdated, making their labor even harder. Moreover, the land was sometimes unsuitable for farming. The weather could be unpredictable, and a bad harvest could result in famine. The daily routine of a serf was grueling. They woke up early, often before sunrise, to begin their chores. Whether it was tilling the soil, planting crops, or harvesting them, the work never stopped. The hours were long, and the work was exhausting. There was little time for rest. The only time they could stop working was at night, and even then, their work wasn't done. They had to maintain their homes, care for their animals, and sometimes even work on the Lord's personal projects. But it wasn't just the work that made life so difficult. Serfs were under the constant control of their lords. Lords had complete authority over their land and the people who lived on it. The lords could demand that the serfs work at any time, even when they were sick or injured. If a serf refused to work, they could be punished, sometimes severely. Punishments could range from a simple beating to more extreme measures, such as imprisonment or even execution. It was not uncommon for a serf to be publicly humiliated for minor infractions. The worst part of this system was that the serfs had no legal rights. They couldn't own property. They couldn't leave the land they worked on without the lord's permission. If a serf tried to leave, they could be caught and returned to the land. If they tried to run away, they would be branded as criminals, and the punishment for that could be severe. Sometimes, runaways were hunted down by armed men and forced to work as punishment for their crime. If a serf were caught trying to escape, they would be sent back to the lord, and the punishment could be severe. Some lords even placed iron collars on their serfs to prevent them from running away. They had no freedom to move about the land as they wished. Serfs also had to pay heavy taxes. In addition to the rent they paid to the lord for the land, they had to give a portion of their crops, livestock, and goods to support the lord's lifestyle. This tax was often extremely high, taking a large part of what they grew. If a serf had a bad harvest, they were still expected to pay the same amount in taxes. If they didn't meet the demands, they could lose their land, or worse, face punishment. The tax burden was crushing, and it left little room for serfs to save for the future or improve their circumstances. They were stuck in a cycle of poverty, with no way out. There were also other obligations that came with being a serf. Lords had the right to force serfs to work on building projects, military campaigns, or even personal tasks for the lord. This meant that serfs didn't have much free time. Their lives were spent working for others, with little to no rest or opportunity to enjoy leisure. Even their time off wasn't entirely free. Serfs still had to work in their own fields, care for animals, and make sure their homes were in order. Any spare time they had would be used to repair tools or tend to their own animals and crops, just to survive. Perhaps the most difficult aspect of being a serf was the lack of freedom. Serfs couldn't leave the land they worked on. If they tried to escape or leave without the lord's permission, they could be captured and punished. Some lords would even keep track of the births and deaths of the serfs, making it nearly impossible for them to move away or start fresh. This system of control meant that serfs were trapped, born into a life they could never change. Many serfs were born, worked, and died without ever knowing what it was like to have freedom. Despite these harsh realities, many serfs still managed to survive. They had small communities where they helped each other out. They shared their limited resources, and they worked together to make the best of their situation. They were resourceful, learning to grow what little they could and finding ways to get by. They knew that cooperation was the only way they would survive. Although their lives were far from easy, there were moments of joy and connection. Weddings, births, and harvest festivals provided some relief from the daily grind. One of the few ways serfs could escape their situation was through rebellion. Throughout medieval Europe, there were several revolts by peasants against the oppressive system of serfdom. These revolts were often sparked by harsh conditions, high taxes, and the unbearable weight of the feudal system. The most famous of these uprisings was the Peasants' Revolt in England in 1381, led by figures like Wat Tyler and John Ball. However, despite their anger and courage, these revolts were usually crushed by the authorities, and very few serfs saw any real change. But the revolts showed that serfs were not without resistance. They fought for better conditions, for freedom, for dignity. Another way serfs could improve their situation was by escaping to a town. Some towns offer a level of freedom that serfs could not find on the land. In exchange for their labor, they were given some rights and freedom. In fact, many towns provided opportunities for serfs to become free after a certain number of years. Some serfs even chose to run away to a town, though it was a risky and dangerous decision. If they were caught, they could be severely punished. Despite all the hardships, serfs did not give up hope. They worked hard, fought for better lives, and dreamed of a world where they could be free. Their struggles laid the foundation for the later movements that would challenge the feudal system and change the course of European history. The life of a serf in medieval Europe is a striking reminder of how far we've come and how much we often take for granted. When we look back at their harsh existence, it's hard to fathom living under such extreme conditions, bound to the land, controlled by a powerful lord, and trapped in a cycle of endless labor and hardship. For serfs, freedom was an illusion, and hope for a better future was often just that, an illusion. Yet, in the face of such oppressive systems, these people managed to survive, resist, and endure. Their story is not just one of suffering. It's also a testament to human resilience, the strength to carry on despite overwhelming odds, to fight for dignity in the smallest ways, and to find ways to support one another in the most difficult times speaks to the unbreakable spirit that exists in us all. While we may not live under the same conditions today, the story of the serfs reminds us of the importance of not taking our freedoms for granted. It reminds us of the value of having control over our own lives and the responsibility we have to protect those freedoms for others. As we consider the world today, we can see echoes of the struggles faced by serfs. Whether it's a fight for workers' rights, social justice, or the struggle for equality, their legacy is still alive in many of the battles we fight today. The serfs may have been silenced in their time, but their story is far from over. It is woven into the fabric of our history, shaping the world we live in and pushing us to fight for a more just and equal future. If the story of survival, resilience, and history moved you, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the past. The lessons of history are timeless, and there's so much more to uncover. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.